The Open Therapy Institute is addressing bias in mental health care. Go to our website, opentherapyinstitute.org. We have CE credit workshops about overlooked issues in the field. You can go to our workshop page and register now and become a member. And for those looking for a therapist, we match people with someone who's highly skilled and truly open. Just contact us through the contact page on the website or email us at info@opentherapyinstitute.org. I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce from the Radical Center.
And I'm Andrew Hartz from the Open Therapy Institute.
Andrew, you had some ideas about masculinity for us to talk about today. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts? Where do you want to go with that?
that's right. Well, I was like, and in terms of like the issues that Open Therapy Institute focuses on, I think masculinity is one of the core issues. And it's not that there's no literature on masculinity. It's that the literature on masculinity is from a very narrow perspective, and it tends to be mostly from a feminist critical theory perspective or a queer theory perspective, as opposed to actual theories that are more empathic towards men and masculinity. And I think there's a concern that I think that men seek therapy less. They maybe have bad experiences in therapy more. There may be things about the way psychotherapy is like culturally framed that like pushes men away. Um, they find it's kind of like this emotion focused, like in the culture, it's like you cry about being a victim and you get somebody who's like nice to you about it. And if you want to talk about that and go through that, then that's what therapy's for or something. And it's a real tragedy because there's a lot of men who I think could benefit a lot from psychotherapy, and it wouldn't necessarily be this emasculating, emotion focused experience where you're just like talking pointlessly about your negative feelings. But I think the field does a terrible job with masculinity in general. And my thoughts about it are pretty similar to my thoughts about race in the sense that I think more or less there's a lot of splitting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I I think that if I were to talk about strengths of masculinity, like what is it that men or masculinity offer society and tend to be better at or have value in, um, there's pretty much nothing I could say that wouldn't be attacked as sexist.
Mm-hmm.
So there really aren't there's nothing that you could really say as a strength of men or masculinity that wouldn't get attacked as sexist. But masculinity is attacked a lot. Men are seen as, can be called less intelligent, less emotionally intelligent, less sensitive, worse parents, more violent, more aggressive, like it's more immature. There's lots of criticisms that are regularly and routinely levied against men throughout the culture. And but it's basically forbidden for them to have a strength. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's inverse with women, where women can be better parents, better partners, more creative, better leaders, nicer, more ethical. Like it's just like there's so many things, but there's nothing a man can do that a woman can't do better. But to talk about a weakness or any type of problematic trends or dynamics with femininity is considered totally unacceptable and sexist.
Mm-hmm.
So we're blocked in, like we've internalized this schema that basically says you can only say bad things about men and you have to acknowledge bad things about men, but you can't ever say anything good about them. And you have to admire women and acknowledge their hardships and support them, but you can't talk about any negative trends or dynamics. And you get stuck in this all or nothing framing. And I think people have really internalized this worldview, um, to where even people that might even identify as like anti-woke or, very conservative, but they still would never say anything positive about men or masculinity. They would never say anything critical about femininity.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, like any category that we create, there's going to be positive and negative trends and dynamics. There's going to be strengths and weaknesses based on the cultural moment, based on whatever, based on the context. Like there's going to be that. but we're unable to speak about it that way. And I think this has been so deeply internalized that it creates a number of problems for both men and women. Um, for men, I think the big dilemma is that if masculinity is this all bad category, men have to decide, do I want to be masculine and bad, or do I want to be good and emasculated?
Mm.
And that's the choice. So if they want to be masculine, they've got to be Andrew Tate or something. They've got to be somebody who's maybe exploitative, aggressive, arrogant, even cruel, antisocial, uh, in order to be masculine. But the good thing is you get to be who you are. You get to be male. You get to be assertive and sexual and potent, but you're a bad person, and you're basically have an antisocial stance towards the world. On the other hand, if you want to be good, you have to be emasculated. And so you're feminized, you're a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, and you're and you're devalued. And so it's either way. If men internalize this emasculated identity, I don't think that works for them. I think there's lots of resentment about it. I think there's lots of the aggression and the invalidation can come out sideways, or it can really harm them. And I think the aggressive stance doesn't really work either. I think that ends up not being functional either. So it's kind of, but there's not, but because we can't acknowledge anything positive about men and masculinity, it's really impossible to have a healthy, positive, assertive, authentic masculine identity that is not, aggressive or psychopathic, and also isn't emasculated. So, and I think this conflict that a lot of men are not consciously dealing with, but are unconsciously wrestling with all the time. And it comes into their marriages, their families, their relationships, dating, how they approach everything. And it's really a deep, deep struggle for them. And then I think there's also this other side of it causing a lot of conflicts for women, because women can then be confused about, why am I attracted to these awful people since men are so terrible? And then they're confused about, like, oh, maybe I'm just attracted to like bad people, or they want a nice man. And so it's like they end up being with somebody, or they push the men they're with to be emasculated, and then they're less attracted to them. It like sets up these kinds of like dilemmas where women needed an archetype of positive masculinity also, that's authentic and real. And I think for men, I'm actually curious in your thoughts, so I want to pause in a second. But for men, they often look to women for permission about how they're allowed to be male. And they want the permission to be able to be like, am I allowed to want what I want? Am I allowed to be who I am? And to what extent? And it's not something where men really look into who they are and think, okay, wait, this is what I am if I really listen to my heart. And this is what I really, because they think, well, she has to kind of give me permission to be that. And so I think there's all these kinds of weird things that men do to kind of like, they have a deep sense of emasculation where they can't authentically define who they are. And then they look towards these substitutes, or this performative, there's like a performative masculinity too, that's maybe like weightlifting, or like, I don't know, just like a kind of like a fake attempt to like feel more male through a performance. But it's not authentic. Like, you have to actually be who you are as a male, and that's the way that you'll be the most authentically masculine. But they're like afraid to do that. So it kind of comes out sideways. But I think this stuff is like played out in people's sex lives and their relationships and families, and but it's almost never, this dilemma is almost never talked about, I find.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like the what you're laying out with the split. Like there's no good way to be masculine. We can praise women and we can put down men, and we and it's sort of this lopsided ability to talk about masculinity versus femininity in the what based on what's culturally acceptable. It leaves men with no good role models. And so the masculine choice, the choice to embrace masculinity, becomes sort of a rebellious choice, which means you get these Tate figures, these, yeah, screw you, I'm going to be who I'm going to be. It's this brutish form of hypermasculinity, but it's not a positive. It's not showing how masculinity can be a good force in culture and for individuals and for families. So there's a real lacking of a positive, very masculine role model or role in society, as you're saying. It's interesting what you said about looking to women for permission also. And that makes sense in a way, as women are the selective sex, the ones who have
Right, right,
more mating opportunity and therefore are the
right.
one that is able to be more selective with who they choose, just from an evolutionary perspective and from a child rearing and reproductive standpoint. And so that sort of looking to your prospective mates to get your cues for how you're supposed to show up and look and be a desirable potential partner. And that was really interesting. And then the performative piece, that was interesting too. And I thought about this biker I saw at one time, and just this big, strong person wearing leather and studs and with a big handlebar mustache, looking really tough, and sat down and had a conversation, and just the softest, most wonderful, kind person. And you think about
Right.
the shell of hyper masculinity that the person
Right.
is wearing. It's not that it's not authentic to him at some level, but there is a really big performative piece in that. I don't know. There's a lot in what you're saying. I'm very interested in.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking, like, first of all, I would say I think masculinity is good, and I think we have to be able to, like, I think that that's a different, to take that to heart is really powerful. But like when masculinity authentically comes out from your heart in an authentic way for who you are, and you really let yourself be who you are as a man, it is more masculine, but it's also very positive.
Mhm.
It's very helpful to people. It can be, uh, I think it can give like clarity and stability and liveliness and creativity, and people are attracted to it. Men and women are attracted to it, but it's like we're confused about why we're attracted to it because we're forced to demonize it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's a tragedy that men don't let who they are really blossom from their heart, because it really would be more masculine and more positive than squelching that and performing whatever it is you're going to perform. You're performing the emasculated man. That's a performance. You're going to perform the, hyper aggressive man. That's a performance. You're going to perform something else. It ends up being fake. You have to, like, it has to come from your heart in an authentic way. And you really can't look to others to tell you how to do it. It's really going to come out the way it comes out for you. And it will be good when you let yourself be authentic. Like that's like for young men in particular, it will be good if you let yourself be who you are as a man. And I don't think that will be, if you're really authentic, it's not, Andrew T. It's not, I don't think it's a cruel thing. I think it's very loving. And there's something about, I guess there's something about the dominant aspects of masculinity where there is a kind of like, there is a type of aggression that comes out in male sexuality, but it I think if it's really coming from the right place, it actually like also has a lot of love in it. And so there's something kind of like, I think it's hard to kind of integrate as a into your identity or personality the fact that like you do have this aggressive and dominant side, and that that's actually like a positive needed thing that has a lot of love that comes from it. So I get why people get hung up on it and why it's a challenge. But I think it's become more of a challenge as masculinity gets more pathologized and more demonized. And it's almost forbidden to, I mean, it's forbidden to say anything positive about men. Even it's like even in like tennis. This is like the weirdest thing where it's like the men play 5 sets, the women play 3 in the Grand Slams. Like they're clearly way better. That's why they're in a different category. But they don't get paid more.
Huh.
And it's seen as sexist to think that they should get paid more for having matches that go twice as long, that get more viewers because they're better performance. It's like you can't even acknowledge that's something about the trans debate that I find really interesting. It's just, is it so hard for society to say that like even on physical size that men have more? Like it's like you can't even say something that's like so obviously true. And it's like they can't even say that men have an advantage there because it's so pathologized to think that men could have an advantage in anything or have anything to offer that has value. I think that just kind of
so interesting. It is really interesting. It's there's this quick jump to, if you say something about men or you say something about women, there's a whatabouting that starts really quickly. And one of the things that I've thought about in terms of what we see displayed culturally, like these Marvel movies that are so popular right now.
right.
If you look at the way that female characters are depicted, they have this, and I know we're talking about masculinity, but I think that we have some distortion in our perceptions of masculine and feminine collectively and culturally right now. One of the things I've observed is that there's the female, I guess, superhero or archetype of the heroine right now is a very hypersexual, feminine looking person with a very masculine personality.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
we can show masculinity when it's a woman because she's a girl boss, she's badass.
Right.
And she can adopt that masculine with no problem. Even the so-called toxic masculine, she can be, just kind of a sexual predator and just this really hard,
arrogant and mean and
And but she can't be soft and feminine. That's not okay either. We shouldn't go there. And then for men, it's really important that it's just really interesting what we're kind of doing with these archetypes of masculinity and femininity in the culture.
Totally. And yeah, there is this kind of like women are cheered when they become more masculine. Like even like the whole girl boss thing. It's kind of like there's something kick-ass, like you're a kick-ass, like there's something about it that is, it seems to like buy into the belief that femininity, like feminine behaviors are inferior in a way. Like it's like, don't be a mother. That's like being impressed. Be a girl boss. It's like being male. Where it's like, why? Like it's weird why they would like concede that like the most feminine things that women do are less valuable than masculine things. Yeah, and it's like, and I don't know. It seems like this all comes from like ideology. Like it's like, does anybody want this? I think some people clearly want it and believe that they want it and think that it's good, but I don't, like it's interesting, like people are going to movies less. And it's like, I think it's like maybe like they feel like they should want this stuff, but they actually don't like it. Even people who would vote for it and say, I totally agree with it, but they don't want to watch it either because they actually don't like it. You know, but it is this like, it's when we were talking about dismantling gender and this kind of all these irrational bits and pieces that are tied up in gender. And it's like ideology can't appreciate that.
Mm.
Like it's like ideology has to kind of like they're the same, like or they're not, or it's like they have to. It's like people are trying to fit into these different boxes. I don't know if that makes sense. Whereas like what if you want things that are irrational, but it's who you are, and there's these bits and pieces that maybe you don't have a clear explanation for, but you're attracted to them. Ideology is like very uncomfortable with that.
Hmm. Yeah, it has to have a tidy way of summing it all up and categorizing everything.
Yeah,
And
why do you, yeah, go
I
ahead.
wonder, one of the things so often we hear that this is all the result of feminism. And I think that one of these days I'll dive into that and really learn about what I think of that. I think that I think I need to educate myself more about feminism and its history and the impacts that feminist ideology has had on our present day culture. But one of the things that I also think is that some of this seems to be an obsession with youth and this we have such an entertainment based culture, at least in
Yeah.
the US, and how many adult people play a lot of video games, spend a lot of time online, just goof around and do things in their free time. That we have so much more free time because of the way that we work and the way that we live in this networked society where we're not living in a subsistence level lifestyle where we're not having to do everything for ourselves. So we have large chunks of free time, and a lot of people spend them just entertaining themselves. And that's sort of youthful. We've got people having less children, so adopting the role of adult and provider and caregiver less. So we've extended the sort of adolescent period out. And in youth, in childhood and early adolescence, boys and girls are less masculine and less feminine. They're more similar to one another. So girls can be more they're not encumbered by being sexy or having sexuality in front and the way that
Mm.
they're interacted with by the world. And boys are not yet bigger and stronger and tougher in the ways that they will be later on. And so the tails are sort of cut off. So there's more difference, I guess, within groups than between groups. So the tail end, where the men become very masculine and the women become very feminine, is sort of lopped off. And during adolescence, we're all sort of
Right.
doing the same thing, or early adolescence, childhood. And I wonder if part of our obsession with youth is influencing our resistance to masculinity and femininity in our culture.
Yeah. Well, it's like, yeah, like not wanting to grow up. It's
Hmm.
like that there's these real developmental challenges about becoming an adult sexual person with
Hmm.
gender
Hmm.
and
And responsibility.
responsibility. Um, that was a really, I think it's still a very common theory about anorexia was
Hmm.
that the anorexia was a desire to not become an adult.
Hmm.
People are kind of confused because I think they often think it's a desire to be attractive, but
Hmm.
it's really, there's a lot of thinking that it's actually to,
Hmm.
because when women develop anorexia, they stop getting their period,
Hmm.
their curves go away, and they kind of become, they fight their own development,
Hmm.
and they become less sexual, they're a little less sexual looking, and so that's kind of like a desire to be dependent. That was the line of thinking. I think it still is.
Hmm.
And it's because growing up is really hard. Like it's a huge adjustment. I think we don't make it easier by like extending adolescence so long and like slowing down the process so much. It actually kind of like probably just makes it more fraught.
Hmm.
Because so like every micro step into maturity is like labored over. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think there is like just a broad social trend to dividing everybody up into like a victim category and an oppressor category and splitting, where the
Hmm.
oppressor category gets insulted and the victim category gets praised.
Hmm.
And that's just present in so many different things. And it's obviously with race and with gender, but like LGBT versus cis hetero, is
Mhm.
another example that we
Mhm.
see more and more now. That's newer, but we see more and more of it. Western and non-Western is another
Mhm.
one where, uh, at least in certain circles, I'd say, especially academia, Western means bad
Mhm.
and non-Western means good. Um, Sometimes American is like that, or other categories.
Individualist versus collectivist was one that was stressed in my graduate program.
Yeah, they would really want to highlight how dumb and wrong individualism was and how
Mhm.
great and realistic collectivism was. And yeah, and maybe like, or with religion, that Christianity's religion that you can openly attack in a way that you can't attack other
And a lot
religions.
of these have a masculine and feminine sort of coding to them too. A lot of the things that you can attack are coded
Right,
masculine, and the things that you
right.
can be okay with are coded feminine.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, it's definitely a trend, and I think it's like the worst trend in our current culture. It has to change.
Hmm.
And it's tragic because I think a lot of it is even men, a lot of men who would support this, or women who would support this framing of gender, they think they're being nice. They
Hmm.
think they're being nice. They're like, hey, people have been oppressed. I'm going to be nice about it. And but the way that they're nice about it is by demonizing one group and idealizing the other and forcing everybody to think in these all or nothing terms. And it's so hateful and it's so destructive and it's not nice.
Yeah, and by excusing terrible behavior on the part of people that they deem to be the disenfranchised, we can let them
Yes.
get away with more because they have been victimized in some way.
It's so not nice. Um, yeah, and I think, but it cuts deep. I think the gender thing just is so personal, and it's like one of the things that I think is like the hardest part about it, about the gender, masculinity, femininity, the whole thing is like every couple, every young couple, or they get married or whatever, they have to relitigate
Mm.
gender as a couple.
Mhm.
What do I do that's masculine? What do you do that's feminine? How do we figure all this out? And it's a constant thing where it's like, even if I didn't get the best, deal for men in terms of the things that I wanted or whatever, the idea of just having it be settled, where it's like, you do these things, I do these things, and we don't fight about it because we live in a Confucius society, Confucian society, and everybody just does, it doesn't have to be that strictly patriarchal. I'm not saying that, but just
Yeah.
the relief of just having social norms.
That's something I would say that's where I kind of come to that same place with the conversation around monogamy versus non-monogamous relationship styles, about the
Right.
renegotiation of some basic foundations. And yet with this one, I can see some developmental utility to that renegotiation because of our
Yeah.
very individualistic society that we live in, where we do raise girls and boys together as kids, and we encourage them to play with each other and to explore what they want and not box them in. I mean, if we were doing it right, which we seem to have gone way beyond that, but at
Right.
least when I was raising my daughters, and they were born in the late 90s. So in
Right.
that period of time, and the period of time, I mean, I was a child of the 80s myself, this whole sort of 20-30 year period, it really seemed like we were moving towards egalitarianism with kids, raising them
Right.
not to be in boxes of masculinity or femininity, or at least trying to do that. And so you really allow them to explore for themselves. And that means when they do grow up and they start to take on these characteristics of the adult and they pair up with someone else, they are offering curiosity to what is this going to look like for us as a couple? How are we going to adopt these roles, and what there's
Totally.
a negotiation there. So I think that there's some developmental utility and something really
Well,
lovely about that. It's just that we've gone too far the other direction in trying to categorize.
yes.
Go ahead.
Well, there's okay. There's so much. like you have to be flexible in relationships, and like
Mhm.
being overly rigid, it's like too many things happen in life. So like people have to have a certain amount of flexibility. In the modern period where everything is changing so rapidly with technology and everything, it's like 10 times,
Mhm.
10x the amount of flexibility that you have to have because society is so radically changing all the time.
Mhm.
And like, I do want people to be able to be themselves. Like, and I that is like a value that I feel very deeply about. And I wouldn't want to have a constricted society. I also wonder, I see how hard it is for people to get coupled and get how many single people there are. They don't get married, they don't figure, and it's like a lot of people that don't figure it out, or they get divorced a lot. And I wonder, I don't have an answer. I mean, I really don't. It's like I I hate the way that I think men and women are set up to fight about these issues as
Mhm.
couples, um, and that the answers seem so difficult, and like fraught. And then even if you get it, it's kind of like somebody's resentful or both people are resentful. It's like,
Mhm.
oh my God. So I there, but and there isn't a clear fantasy of like there is a fantasy of like this all being easily resolved, which isn't going to happen.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know what to do instead. We're kind of like, yeah, we've kind of this is the way it is now. And maybe as like in the helping professions, it's just like acknowledging the reality of like this is our culture now.
Mhm. Well, I think it's really helpful to try to articulate a positive vision of masculinity and to try to stand up for that being a real thing, that masculinity
Right.
is a positive thing, that it's good that men are men,
Right, right,
and
right.
uh, and that there are strengths that men have that stand out. And just as we can say that about women, we should be able to say that about men.
Yes. Yes. Totally.
I think that we should have a part two of this conversation.
Okay, absolutely. It's great talking.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for diving into it.